Are we live? Ooh, I can hear myself. Nice. Okay. Still kind of curious what's going on with soundwords. Nothing. So I'm here. Hello. Soundwords turned off on the other one. Oop. Back up there. So I'm faded to black won't work. Let's see. Oop. Pain in the butt. What do I do before I stream? Oh, I gotta sit in my starting stream talking to myself. Yeah, go from there. There we go with that. Oh, it's 20 feet on there. Check the books. Click enable. What the hell? Do I have to activate blurps every freaking time? Madness. This is madness. No, this is politics. I really want the blurbs to work on all screens. Let's go to my library. And it played in my ear. Don't know if it played on stream though. Do I have a serious delay? This. Oh, damn it, that got up too. Barely got the first word out. No, just the audio. I'm going to be hearing a lot of myself. I'm testing another theory, so. Yeah, I get to hear myself 3 times. Fun. Hey, Eb. How you doing? Ooh, what you cooking? Ooh, with mutton? Oh, that sounds good. Haven't had mutton for a while. Oh, got there. A potato curry with mutton. That just sounds good. What is with my audio? Okay. No problem with rabbits lurking around. And then 9:05. I've got another 5 minutes before I usually start into the story, so. Never sure what to do to fill the time. I've yet to find a music that seems appropriate for my streams. I'm not really sure what will go with my theme, because, either have the bookstore or you have my little library that I read from. Let's see, then I've got the. Thought I had Twitch's little soundtrack program. Soundtrack by Twitch, imagine that. I can never think of music to use for the stream. Audio for that. And of course, the Twitch program doesn't want to install. Bytes. What do you do with a broken program? What do you do with a broken program? What do you do with a broken program when you're trying to stream it? Okay. Let me switch to the reading screen. Reading screen. Boop. I'll say boop when I'm just like, okay, fit into it. Cool. It's way too often. But we are back in the Blue Fairy book tonight. And oddly enough, the first story that comes up on it is Cinderella, which I thought was wonderfully appropriate when I found that glass slipper when I was out running around today. Not often you run across a glass slipper anyway. But See, 9:09. 10 minutes into it. Okay. And our first story for the night is not. It's probably closer to the more well-known version of the story than is the other stories of other versions I've read. But tonight, let me adjust my roll. Sorry for being loud. Okay. Our first story is Cinderella, or The Little Glass Slipper. Once there was a gentleman who married, for his second wife, the proudest and most haughty woman that was ever seen. She had, by a former husband, 2 daughters of her own, who were, indeed, exactly like her in all things. He had likewise, by his previous wife, a young daughter, but of unparalleled goodness and sweetness of temper, which she took from her mother, who was the best creature in the world. No sooner were the ceremonies of the wedding over, but the mother-in-law began to show herself in her true colors. She could not bear the good qualities of this pretty girl, and the less because they made her own daughters appear more odious. She employed her in the meanest work of the house. She scoured the dishes, tables, etc. She scrubbed Madame's chamber, and those of Mrs. her daughters. She lay up in a sorry garret upon a wretched straw bed, while her sisters lay in fine rooms, with floors all inlaid, upon beds of very newest fashion, and where they had looking-glasses so large that they might see themselves at their full length from head to foot. The poor girl all patiently, and dared not tell her father, who would have rattled her off, for his wife governed him entirely. When she had done her work, she used to go into the chimney-corner and sit down among cinders and ashes, which made her commonly be called Cinder-wench. But the youngest, who was not so rude and uncivil as the eldest, called her Cinderella. However, Cinderella, notwithstanding her mean appeal, was 100 times handsomer than her sisters, though they were always dressed very richly. It happened that the king's son gave a ball and invited all persons of fashion to it. Our young misses were also invited, for they cut a grand figure among the quality. They were mightily delighted by this invitation, and wonderfully busy in choosing out such gowns, petticoats, and head-clothes as might become them. This was a new trouble for Cinderella, for it was she who ironed her sisters' linen, and plaited their ruffles. They talked all day long of nothing but how they should be dressed. "For my part," said the oldest, "I will wear my red velvet suit with French trimming." Sorry, Sam, for some reason the sound alerts still aren't working right. But nice try. "And I," said the youngest, "shall have my usual petticoat, but then, to make amends for that, I will put on my gold-flowered mantle, and my diamond stomacher, which is far from being the most ordinary one in the world." They sent for the best tire-woman they could get to make up their headdresses, and adjust their double pinners, and they had their red brushes and patches from Mademoiselle de la Pocha. Cinderella was likewise called up to them to be consulted in all these matters. For she had excellent notions, and advised them always for the best, nay, and offered her services to dress their heads, which they were very willing she should do. And she was doing this. They said this to her. "Cinderella, would you not be glad to go to the ball?" "Alas," she said, "you only jeer me. It is not for such as I am to go thither." "Thou art in right of it," replied they. "It would make the people laugh to see a cinder wench at the ball." Anyone but Cinderella would have dressed their heads awry, but she was very good, and dressed them perfectly well. They were almost 2 days without eating, so much that they were transported with joy. They broke above a dozen laces in trying to be laced up close, and that they might have a fine slender shape. And they were continually at their looking-glass. At last the happy day came. They went to court, and Cinderella followed them with her eyes as long as she could. And when she had lost sight of them, she fell a-crying. Her godmother, who saw her in all tears, asked her what was the matter. "I wish I could. I wish I could." She was not able to speak the rest, being interrupted by her tears and sobbing. This godmother of hers, who was a fairy, said to her, "Thou willst thou couldst go to the ball, is it not?" "Yes," cried Cinderella with a great sigh. "Well," said the godmother, "be a good girl, and I will contrive that you shalt go." Then she took her into her chamber, and said to her, "Run to the garden and bring me a pumpkin." Cinderella went immediately to gather the finest she could get, and brought it to her godmother, not being able to imagine how this pumpkin should make her go to the ball. Her godmother scooped out all the inside of it, having left nothing but the rind, which done, she struck with her wand, and the pumpkin was instantly turned into a fine coach, gilded all over with gold. Then she went to look into her mousetrap, where she found 6 mice, all alive, and ordered Cinderella to lift up a little of the trap-door, when, giving each mouse, as it went out, the little trap with her wand, the mouse was at that moment turned into a fine horse, which altogether made a very fine set of 6 horses, of a beautiful mouse-colored dapple gray, being at a loss for a coachman. "I will go and see," said Cinderella. "If there is never a rat in the rat-trap, we may make a coachman of him." "Thou art in the right," replied her godmother. "Go and look." Cinderella brought the trap to her, and in it there were 3 huge rats. The fairy made a choice of one of the 3, which had the largest beard, and having touched him with her wand, he was turned into a fat, jolly coachman, who had the smartest whiskers eyes ever beheld. After that, she said to her, "Go again into the garden, and you will find 6 lizards behind the watering pot. Bring them to me." She had no sooner done so, but her godmother turned them into 6 footmen, who skipped up immediately behind the coach, with their liveries and their all dotted with gold and silver, and clung as close behind each other as they could, if they had done nothing other than their whole lives. The fairy then said to Cinderella, "Well, you see here the equipage fit to go to the ball with. Are you not pleased with it?" "Oh, yes," she cried, "but I must go thither as I am, in these nasty rags." Her godmother only just touched her with her wand, and at that same instant her clothes were turned into cloth of gold and silver, all beset with jewels. This done, she gave her a pair of glass slippers, the prettiest in the whole world. Thus being decked out, she got up onto the coach, but her godmother, above all things, commanded her not to stay till after midnight, telling her at the same time that if she stayed one moment longer, the coach would turn into a pumpkin again, the horses mice, her coachman a rat, and the footmen lizards, and her clothes become just as they were before. She promised her godmother she would not fail of leaving the ball before midnight, and then away she drives, scarce able to contain herself for joy. The king's son, who was told that a great princess, whom nobody knew, was come, and ran out to receive her. He gave her his hand as she alighted out of the coach, and led her into the ball, among all the company. There was immediately a profound silence. They left off dancing, and the violin ceased to play. So attentive was everyone to contemplate the singular beauties of the unknown newcomer. Nothing was then heard but a confused noise of, "Ah, how handsome she is! Ah, how handsome she is!" The king himself, old as he was, could not help watching her, and telling the queen softly that it was a long time since he had seen so beautiful and lovely a creature, which probably got him overed rather quickly. All the ladies were busied in considering her clothes and headdress, that they all might have some made the next day for the same pattern, provided they could meet with such fine material and able hands to make them. The king's son conducted her to the most honorable seat, and afterward took her out to dance with him. She danced so very gracefully that they all more and more admired her. A fine collection was served up, whereof the young prince ate not a morsel, so intently was he busied at gazing at her. He's getting his full of eye candy. She went and sat down by her sisters, showing them 1,000 civilities, giving them part of her oranges and citrons, which the prince had presented with her, which very much surprised them, for they did not know her. Which very much surprised... While Cinderella was thus amusing her sisters, she heard the clock strike 11 3/4. Whereupon she immediately made a curtsy to the company, and hastened away as fast as she could. Being got home, she ran to seek out her godmother, and after having thanked her, she said she could not but heartily wish she could go to the ball the next night, because the king's son had desired her. Sounds like everyone did. As she was eagerly telling her godmother whatever had passed at the ball, her two sisters knocked at the door, which Cinderella ran and opened. "How long have you stayed?" cried she, gaping and rubbing her eyes, and stretching herself as if she had just been walked out of her sleep. She had not, however, any manner of inclination to sleep, since they went from home. "If thou hadst been at the ball," says one of her sisters, "thou wouldst not have been tired with it. There came thither the finest princess, the most beautiful ever was seen with mortal eyes. She showed us 1,000 civilities, and gave us oranges and citrons. Very tasty." Cinderella seemed very indifferent to the matter. Indeed, she asked them the name of the princess, but they told her they did not know it, and that the king's son was very uneasy on her account, and would give all the world to know who she was. At this, Cinderella, smiling, replied, "She must, then, be very beautiful indeed. How happy you have been! Could not I see her? Ah, dear Miss Charlotte, do lend me your yellow suits of clothes, which you wear every day." "Ah, to be sure," cried Miss Charlotte. "Lend my clothes to a dirty cinder wench thou art? I would be a fool." Cinderella, indeed, expected well such answer, and was very glad of the refusal, for she would have been sadly put to it if her sister had lent her what she asked for jestingly. The next day the two sisters were at the ball, and so was Cinderella, but dressed more magnificently than before. The king's son was always by her, and never ceased his compliments and kind speeches to her, to whom all this was so far from being tiresome that she quite forgot what her grandmother recommended to her, so that she at last counted the clock striking 12, when she took it to be no more than 11. Daylight savings. She then rose up and fled, as nimble as a deer. The prince followed, but could not overtake her. She left behind one of her glass slippers, which the prince took up most carefully. She got home, but quite out of breath and in her nasty old clothes, having nothing left her of all her finery but one of the little slippers, the fellow to that she dropped. The guards at the palace gate were asked if they had not seen the princess go out. They said they had seen nobody go out but a young girl, very meanly dressed, who had more an air of poor country wench than of gentlewoman. When the two sisters returned from the ball, Cinderella asked them if they had been well diverted, and if the fine lady had been there. They told her yes, but she hurried away immediately out when it struck 12, and with such haste that she dropped one of her little glass slippers, the prettiest in the world, which the king's son had taken up, that he had done nothing but look for her all the time at the ball, and that most certainly he was very much in love with the beautiful person who owned the glass slipper. What they said was very true, for a few days after the king's son caused it to be proclaimed, by sound of trumpet, that he would marry her whose foot the slipper would fit. It's a size 6. Keep that out, girls. They whom employed began to try upon the princesses, then the duchesses, and all the court, but in vain. It was brought to the two sisters, who did all they possibly could to thrust their foot into the slipper, but they could not effect it. Cinderella, who saw this, and knew her slipper, said to them, laughing, "Let me see if it will not fit me." The sisters burst out laughing, and began to banter her. The gentleman who was sent to try the slipper looked earnestly at Cinderella, and, finding her very handsome, said, it was but just that she should try, and that he had orders to make everyone take trial. He obliged Cinderella to sit down, and, putting the slipper on her foot, found that it went on very easily, and fitted her as if it had been made of wax. The astonishment her two sisters were in was excessively great, but still abundantly greater when Cinderella pulled out of her pocket the other slipper, and put it on her foot. Thereupon in came her godmother, who, having touched her with her magic wand, made Cinderella's clothes richer and more magnificent than any of those dresses she had made before. And now her two sisters found her to be that fine, beautiful lady whom they had seen at the ball. They threw themselves at her feet to beg pardon for all the ill treatment they had made her undergo. Cinderella took them up, and, as she embraced them, cried that she forgave them with all her heart, and desired them always to love her. She was conducted to the young prince, dressed as she was. He thought her more charming than ever, and, a few days after, married her. Cinderella, who was no less good than beautiful, gave her two sisters lodgings in the palace, and that very same day matched them with two great lords of the court. Bullshit! Excuse me. Yeah, we all know how it really ended up. So. Oh well. That's almost the Disney version, except, you know, nicer. And 2 trips to the ball instead of 3. But oh well. Stories written by different people tell the same story and never the same way, so. There's another one that Disney altered considerably. Aladdin and the Wonderful Lamp. There once lived a poor tailor who had a son called Aladdin, a careless, idle boy who would do nothing but play ball all day long in the streets with the little idle boys like himself. This so grieved his father that he died. Seriously? Yet, in spite of his mother's tears and prayers, Aladdin did not mend his ways. One day, when he was playing in the streets as usual, a stranger asked him his age and if he was not the son of Mustafa the tailor. "I am, sir," replied Aladdin, "but he died a long while ago." On this, the stranger, who was a famous African magician, fell on his neck and kissed him, saying, "I am your uncle, and knew you from your likeness to my brother. Go to your mother and tell her I am coming." Aladdin ran home and told his mother of his newly found uncle. "Indeed, child," said she, "your father had a brother, but I always thought he was dead." However, she prepared supper and bade Aladdin seek his uncle, who came laden with wine and fruit. He presently fell down and kissed the place where Mustafa used to sit, bidding Aladdin's mother not be surprised at having seen him before. And he had been 40 years out of the country. He then turned to Aladdin and asked him his trade, at which the boy hung his head, while his mother burst into tears. On learning that Aladdin was idle and would learn no trade, he offered to take a shop for him and stock it with merchandise. Next day he bought Aladdin a fine suit of clothes and took him all over the city, showing him the sights, and brought him home at nightfall to his mother, who was overjoyed to see her son so fine. Next day the magician led Aladdin into some beautiful gardens a long way outside the city gates. They sat down by a fountain, and the magician pulled a cake from his girdle, which he divided between them. They then journeyed onward till they almost reached the mountains. Aladdin was so tired that he begged to go back, but the magician beguiled him with pleasant stories, and led him on in spite of himself. At last they came to 2 mountains divided by a narrow valley. "We will go no farther," said the false uncle. "I will show you something wonderful, only do you gather up sticks while I kindle a fire." When it was lit, the magician threw on it powder he had with him, and at the same time saying some magical words, the earth trembled a little and opened in front of them, disclosing a square flat stone with a brass ring in the middle to raise it by. Aladdin tried to run away, but the magician caught him and gave him a blow that knocked him down. "What have I done, uncle?" he said piteously, whereupon the magician said more kindly, "Fear nothing, but obey me. Beneath this stone lies a great treasure which is to be yours, and no one else may touch it, so you must do exactly as I tell you." At the word treasure, Aladdin forgot his fears and grasped the ring as he was told, saying the names of his father and grandfather. The stone came up quite easily, and some steps appeared. "Go down," said the magician. "At the foot of those steps you'll find an open door leading into 3 large halls. Tuck up your gown and go through them without touching anything, or you will die instantly. These halls lead into a garden of fine fruit trees. Walk on until you come to a niche in the terrace where stands a lighted lamp. Pour out the oil it contains and bring it to me." He drew the ring from his finger and gave it to Aladdin, bidding him prosper. Aladdin found everything as the magician had said, gathered some fruit off the tree, and having got the lamp, arrived at the mouth of the cave. The magician cried out in a great hurry, "Make haste and give me the lamp." This Aladdin refused to do until he was out of the cave. The magician flew into a terrible passion, and throwing some more powder into the fire, he said something, and the stone rolled back into its place. The magician left Persia forever, which plainly showed that he was no uncle to Aladdin, but a cunning magician who had read in his magic books of a wonderful lamp, which would make him the most powerful man in the world. Though he alone knew where to find it, he could only receive it from the hand of another. He had picked out the foolish Aladdin for this purpose, intending to get the lamp and kill him afterwards. For 2 days Aladdin remained in the dark, crying and lamenting. At last he clasped his hands in prayer, and in doing so rubbed the ring, which the magician had forgotten to take from him. Immediately an enormous and frightful genie rose out of the earth, saying, "What wouldst thou with me? I am the slave of the ring, and will obey thee in all things." Aladdin fearlessly replied, "Deliver me from this place." Whereupon the earth opened, and he found himself outside. As soon as his eyes could bear the light, he went home, but fainted on the threshold. When he came to himself, he told his mother what had passed, and showed her the lamp and the fruits he had gathered in the garden, which were in reality precious stones. He then asked for some food. "Alas, child," she said, "I have nothing in the house, but I have spun a little cotton and will go and sell it." Sell the freaking trolls. Aladdin bade her to keep her cotton, for he would sell the lamp instead. As it was very dirty, she began to rub it, that it might fetch a higher price. Instantly a hideous genie appeared and asked what she would have. She fainted away, but Aladdin, snatching the lamp, said boldly, "Fetch me something to eat." The genie returned with a silver bowl, 12 silver plates containing rich meats, 2 silver cups, and 2 bottles of wine. Aladdin's mother, when she came to herself, said, "Whence comes this splendid feast?" "Ask not, but eat," replied Aladdin. So they sat and ate breakfast until it was dinner time. And Aladdin told his mother about the lamp. She begged him to sell it and have nothing to do with devils. "No," said Aladdin. "Since chance hath made the virtue aware of its virtues, we will use it, and the ring likewise, which I shall always wear on my finger." When they had eaten all the genie had brought, Aladdin sold one of the silver plates, and so on until none were left. He then had recourse to the genie, who gave him another set of plates, and thus they lived for many years. One day Aladdin heard of an order from the Sultan proclaiming that everyone was to stay home and close his shutters while his princess, his daughter, went to and fro from the bath. Aladdin was seized by a desire to see her face, which was very difficult, as she always went veiled. He hid himself behind the door of the bath and peeped in through a chink. The princess lifted her veil as she went in, and looked so beautiful that Aladdin fell in love with her at first sight. veil, right? Hey, Yoti. He went home so changed that his mother was frightened. He told her he loved the princess so deeply that he could not live without her, and meant to ask her in marriage of her father. His mother, on hearing this, burst out laughing. But Aladdin had last prevailed upon her that he would go before the Sultan and carry his request. Have a good evening. She fetched a napkin and laid it on the magic fruits from the enchanted garden, which sparkled and shone like the most beautiful jewels. She took these with her to please the Sultan, and set out, trusting in the lamp. Hey, Talbot. The Grand Vizier and the Lords of the Council had just gone in as she entered the hall, and placed herself in front of the Sultan. He, however, took no notice of her. She went every day for a week, and stood in the same place. When the council broke up on the 6th day, the Sultan said to his vizier, "I see a certain woman in the audience chamber every day carrying something in a napkin. Call her next time that I might find out what she wants." Next day, at a sign from the vizier, she went up in front of the throne and remained kneeling till the Sultan said to her, "Rise, good woman, and tell me what you want." She hesitated, so the Sultan sent away all but the vizier and bade her speak freely, promising to forgive her beforehand for anything she might say. She told him of her son's violent love for the princess. "I prayed him to forget her," she said, "but in vain. He threatened to do some desperate deed if I refused to go and ask your majesty for the hand of the princess. Now I pray you to forgive not me alone, but my son Aladdin." The Sultan asked her kindly what she had in the napkin, whereupon she unfolded the jewels and presented them. He was thunderstruck, turning to the vizier and said, "What sayest thou? Ought I not bestow the princess on one who values her at such a price?" The vizier, who wanted her for his own son, begged the Sultan to withhold her for 3 months, in the course of which he hoped his son would contrive to make him a richer present. The Sultan granted this, and told Aladdin's mother that, though he consented to the marriage, she must not appear before him again for 3 months. Aladdin waited patiently for nearly 3 months, but after 2 had elapsed, his mother, going into the city to buy oil, found everyone rejoicing, and asked what was going on. "Do you not know," was the answer, "that the son of the Grand Vizier is to marry the Sultan's daughter tonight?" Breathless, she ran and told Aladdin, who was overwhelmed at first, but presently bethought him of the lamp. He rubbed it, and the genie appeared, saying, "What is thy will?" Aladdin replied, "The Sultan, as thou knowest, has broken his promise to me, and the vizier's son is to have the princess. My command is that tonight you bring her hither to the bride and bridegroom." "Master, I obey," said the genie. Aladdin went to his chamber, where, sure enough, at midnight the genie transported the bed containing the vizier's son and the princess. "Take this new married man," he said, "and put him outside in the cold, and return at daybreak." Whereupon the genie took the vizier's son out of the bed, leaving Aladdin with the princess. "Fear nothing," Aladdin said to her. "You are my wife, promised to me by your unjust father, and no harm shall come to you." Wow, damn, Aladdin. The princess was too frightened to speak, that's a given, and passed the most miserable night of her life, while Aladdin lay down beside her and slept soundly. At the appointed hour, the genie fetched in the shivering bridegroom, laid him in his place, and transported the bed back to the palace. That's just freaky. Oh well. Presently the Sultan came to wish his daughter good morning. The unhappy vizier's son jumped up and hid himself, while the princess would not say a word and was very sorrowful. The sultan sent her mother to her, who said, "How comes it, child, that you will not speak to your father? What has happened?" The princess sighed deeply and told her mother of how, during the night, the bed had been carried into some strange house and what had passed there. Her mother did not believe her in the least and bade her rise and consider it an idle dream. The following night, exactly the same thing happened, and the next morning, on the princess's refusal to speak, the sultan threatened to cut off her head. She then confessed all, bidding him to ask the vizier's son if it were not so. The sultan told the vizier to ask his son, who owned the truth, adding that, dearly as he loved the princess, he would rather die than to go through another such fearful night, and wished to be separated from her. His wish was granted, and there was an end to feasting and rejoicing. When the 3 months were over, Aladdin sent his mother to remind the sultan of his promise. She stood in the same place as before, and the sultan, who had forgotten Aladdin, at once remembered him and sent for her. On seeing her poverty, the sultan felt less inclined than ever to keep his word, and asked his vizier's advice, who counseled him to set high a value of the princess that no man living could come up with it. The sultan then turned to Aladdin's mother, saying, "Good woman, the sultan must remember his promises, and I will remember mine. But your son must first send me 40 basins of gold brimming full of jewels, carried by 40 black slaves, led by as many white ones, splendidly dressed. Tell him that I await his answer." The mother of Aladdin bowed low and went home, thinking all was lost. She gave Aladdin the message, adding, "He may wait long enough for your answer." "Not so long, mother, as you think," her son replied. "I would do a great deal more than that for the princess." He summoned the genie, and in a few moments had 80 slaves arrived, and filled up the small house and garden. Aladdin made them set out to the palace, 2 and 2, followed by his mother. And they were so richly dressed, with such splendid jewels in their girdles, that everyone crowded to see them and the basins of gold they carried on their heads. They entered the palace, and after kneeling before the sultan, stood in a half-circle round the throne with their arms crossed, while Aladdin's mother presented them to the sultan. He hesitated no longer, but said, "Good woman, return and tell your son that I wait for him with open arms." She lost no time in telling Aladdin, bidding him to make haste. But Aladdin first called the genie. "I want a scented bath," he said, "a richly embroidered habit, a horse surpassing the sultan's, and 20 slaves to attend me. Besides this, 6 slaves beautifully dressed to wait on my mother. And lastly, 10,000 pieces of gold in 10 purses." No sooner said than done. Aladdin mounted his horse and passed through the streets, the slaves strewing gold as they went. Those who had played with him in his childhood knew him not. He had grown so handsome. When the sultan saw him, he came down from his throne, embraced him, and led him into a hall where a feast was spread, intending to marry him to the princess that very day. But Aladdin refused, saying, "I must build a palace fit for her," and took his leave. Once home, he said to the genie, "Build me a palace of the finest marble, set in jasper, agate, and other precious stones. In the middle you shall build me a large hall with a dome, with 4 walls of massy gold and silver, each side having 6 windows, whose lattices, all except one which is to be left unfinished, must be set in diamonds and rubies. There must be stables and horses and grooms and slaves. Go and see about it." The palace was finished by the next day, and the genie carried him there and showed him all his orders faithfully carried out, even to the laying of the velvet carpet at Aladdin's palace of the sultans. Aladdin's mother then dressed herself carefully and walked to the palace with her slaves, while he followed her on horseback. The Sultan sent musicians with trumpets and cymbals to meet them, so that the air resounded with music and cheers. She was taken to the princess, who saluted her and treated her with great honor. At night, the princess said goodbye to her father and set out on the carpet for Aladdin's palace, with his mother at her side, and followed by 100 slaves. She was charmed at the sight of Aladdin, who ran to receive her. "Princess," he said, "blame your beauty for my boldness if I have displeased you." Damn. She told him that, having seen him, she willingly obeyed her father in this matter. After the wedding had taken place, Aladdin led her into the hall where the feast was prepared, and she supped with him, after which they danced till midnight. The next day, Aladdin invited the Sultan to see the palace. On entering the hall with the 24 windows, with their diamonds, rubies, and emeralds, he cried, "It's a world wonder! There's only one thing that surprises me. Was it by accident that one window was left unfinished?" "No, sir, by design," returned Aladdin. "I wished your majesty to have the glory of finishing this palace." The Sultan was pleased and sent for the best jewelers in the city. He showed them the unfinished window and bade them fit it like the others. "Sir," replied their spokesman, "we cannot find jewels enough." The Sultan had his own fetched, which they were soon used, but to no purpose. For a month's time the work was not half done. Aladdin, knowing that their task was in vain, bade them undo their work and carry the jewels back, and the genie finished the window at his command. The Sultan was surprised to receive his jewels again, and visited Aladdin, who showed him the window was finished. The Sultan embraced him, and the envious vizier meanwhile hinting that it was the work of an enchantment. Aladdin had won 2 hearts of the people in his gentle bearing. He was made captain of the Sultan's armies and won several battles for him, but remained modest and courteous as before, and thus lived in peace and contentment for several years. But far away in Africa, the magician remembered Aladdin, and by his magic arts discovered that Aladdin, instead of perishing miserably in the cave, had escaped, and had married a princess with whom he was living in great honor and wealth. He knew that the poor tailor's son could only have accomplished this by means of the lamp, and traveled night and day until he reached the capital of China, bent on Aladdin's ruin. As he passed through the town, he heard people talking everywhere about a marvelous palace. "Forgive my ignorance," he asked. "What is this palace you speak of?" "Have you not heard of Prince Aladdin's palace?" was the reply. "The greatest wonder of the world. I will direct you if you have the mind to see it." The magician thanked him who spoke, and, having seen the palace, knew that it was raised by the genie of the lamp, and became mad with rage. He determined to get a hold of the lamp and again plunge Aladdin into the deepest poverty. Unluckily, Aladdin had gone hunting for 8 days, which gave the magician plenty of time. He bought a dozen copper lamps, put them into a basket, and went to the palace, crying, "New lamps for old!" followed by a jeering crowd. The princess, sitting in the hall of 24 windows, sent a slave to find out what that noise was about. He came back laughing, and he said the princess scolded her. "Madam," replied the slave, "who can help but laughing at an old man offering in exchange fine new lamps for old ones?" Another slave said, hearing this, "There's an old one in the cornice which we have here." Now, this was the magic lamp, which Aladdin had left there, as he could not take it out hunting with him. The princess, not knowing its value, laughingly bade the slave take it and make the exchange. She went and said to the magician, "Give me your lamp for this." He snatched it and bade the slave take her choice, amid the jeers of the crowd. Little he cared, but he left off crying his lamps and went out of the city gates to a lonely place where he remained till nightfall, when he pulled out the lamp and rubbed it. The genie appeared, and at the magician's command carried him, together with the palace and the princess in it, to a lonely place in Africa. The next morning the Sultan looked out the window towards Aladdin's palace and rubbed his eyes, for it was gone. He sent for the vizier and asked what had become of the palace. The vizier looked out too, and was lost in astonishment. He again put it down to enchantment, and this time the Sultan believed him, and sent 30 men on horseback to fetch Aladdin in chains. They met him riding home, bound him, and forced him to go with them on foot. People, however, who loved him, followed, armed, to see what became of him, that he came to no harm. He was carried before the Sultan, who ordered the executioner to cut off his head. The executioner made Aladdin kneel down, bandaged his eyes, and raised the scimitar to strike. At that instant, the vizier, who saw the crowd had forced their way into the courtyard and were scaling the walls to rescue Aladdin, called the executioner to stay his hand. The people, indeed, looked so threatening that the Sultan gave way and ordered Aladdin to be unbound, and pardoned him in the sight of the crowd. Aladdin now begged to know what he had done. "False wretch," said the Sultan, "come hither," and showed him from the window the place where his palace had stood. Aladdin was so amazed he could not say a word. "Where is my palace and my daughter?" demanded the Sultan. "For the first I am so deeply concerned, but my daughter I must have, and you must find her or lose your head." Aladdin begged for 40 days in which to find her, promising, if he failed, to return and suffer death at the Sultan's pleasure. His prayer was granted, and he went forth sadly from the Sultan's presence. For 3 days he wandered about like a madman, asking everyone what had become of the palace, but they only laughed and pitied him. He came to the banks of a river and knelt down to say his prayers before throwing himself in. In so doing, he rubbed the magic ring he still wore. The genie he had seen in the cave appeared and asked his will. "Save my life, genie," said Aladdin. "Bring my palace back." "This is not in my power," said the genie. "I am only the slave of the ring. You must ask him of the lamp." "Even so," said Aladdin, "but thou canst take me to the palace and set me down under my dear wife's window." He at once found himself in Africa, under the window of the princess, and fell asleep out of sheer weariness. He was awakened by the singing of the birds, and his heart was lighter. He saw plainly that all his misfortunes were owing to the loss of the lamp, and vainly wondered who had robbed him of it. That morning the princess rose earlier than she had done since she had been carried away into Africa by the magician, whose company she was forced to endure once a day. She, however, treated him so harshly that he dared not live there altogether. As she was dressing, one of the women looked out and saw Aladdin. The princess ran and opened the window, and at that noise she made Aladdin looked up. She called to him to come to her, and great was the joy of these lovers at seeing each other once again. After she had kissed her Aladdin, "I beg of you, princess, in God's name, before we speak of anything else, for your own sake and mine, tell me what has become of the old lamp I left in the cornice in the hall of the 24 windows when I went hunting." "Alas," said she, "I am an innocent cause of your sorrows," and told him of the exchange of the lamp. "And now I know," cried Aladdin, "that we have to thank the African magician for this. Where is the lamp?" "He carries it with him," said the princess. "I know, for he pulled it out of his breast to show me. He wishes to break my faith with you and marry him, saying that you were beheaded at my father's command." He is forever speaking ill of you, but I only reply with tears. If I persist, I doubt not that he will use violence. Aladdin comforted her, and left her for a while. He changed clothes with the first person he met in town, and having bought a certain powder, returned to the princess, who let him in by the little side door. Put on your most beautiful dress, he said to her, and receive the magician with smiles, leading him to believe that you have forgotten me. Invite him to sup with you, and say you wish to taste the wine of his country. He will go for some time, and while he is gone I will tell you what to do. She listened carefully to Aladdin, and when he left she arrayed herself gaily for the first time since she left China. She put on a girdle and headdress of diamonds, and seeing in glass that she was more beautiful than ever, received the magician, saying to his great astonishment, I have made up my mind that Aladdin is dead, and that all my tears will not bring him back to me, so I am resolved to mourn no more, and have therefore invited you to sup with me. But I am tired of the wines of China, and would fain taste those of Africa. The magician flew to his cellar, and the princess put the powder Aladdin gave her into her cup. When he returned, she asked him to drink her health in the wine of Africa, handing him her cup in exchange for his. As a sign, she was reconciled to him. Before drinking, the magician made her a speech in the praise of her beauty, but the princess cut him short, saying, Let us drink first, and you shall say what you will afterwards. She set her cup to her lips and kept it there, while the magician drained his to the dregs and fell back lifeless. Wow. The princess then opened the door to Aladdin and flung her arms around his neck, but Aladdin put her away, bidding her leave him, for as he had more to do. He went to the dead magician and took the lamp out of his vest, and bade the genie carry the palace and all in it back to China. This was done, and the princess in her chamber only felt 2 little shocks, and little thought she was home again. The Sultan, who was sitting in his closet, mourning his lost daughter, happened to look up, and rubbed his eyes, for there stood the palace as before. He hastened thither, and Aladdin received him in the hall of 24 windows, with the princess at his side. Aladdin told him what had happened, and showed him the dead body of the magician, that he might believe. 10 days' feast was proclaimed, and it seemed as if Aladdin might now live the rest of his life in peace. But it was not to be. The African magician had a younger brother, who was, if possible, more wicked and more cunning than himself. He traveled to China to avenge his brother's death, and went to visit a pious woman named Fatima, thinking she might be of use to him. He entered her cell and clapped a dagger to her breast, telling her to rise and do his bidding on pain of death. He changed clothes with her, and colored his face like hers, and put on her veil, and murdered her, that she might tell no tales. Then he went toward the palace of Aladdin, and all the people, thinking he was a holy woman, gathered around him, kissing his hands, and begging his blessing. When he got to the palace, there was such a noise going on around him that the princess bade her slave look out the window and see what was the matter. The slave said it was a holy woman, curing people by her touch of their ailments, whereupon the princess, who had long desired to see Fatima, sent for her. On coming to the princess, the magician offered up a prayer for her health and prosperity. When he had done, the princess made him sit by her, and begged him to stay with her always. The false Fatima, who wished for nothing better, consented, but kept his veil down for fear of discovery. The princess showed him the hall and asked him what he thought of it. It is truly beautiful, said the false Fatima. In my mind it wants but one thing. And what is that? Said the princess. If only a roc's egg, replied he, were hung up in the middle of this dome, it would be a wonder of the world. A roc's egg? After this, the princess could think of nothing but the roc's egg, and went to Aladdin. As he returned from hunting, he found her in very ill humor. He begged her to know what was amiss, and she told him that all her pleasure in the hall was spoiled for the want of a roc's egg hanging from the dome. That is all, replied Aladdin. You shall soon be happy. He left her and rubbed the lamp, and when the genie appeared, he commanded him to bring a roc's egg. The genie gave such a loud and terrible shriek that the hall shook. Wretch! He cried. Is it not enough that I have done everything for you, but you command me to bring my master and hang him up in the midst of this dome? You and your wife and your palace deserve to be burnt to ashes. But that this request does come from you, but from the brother of the African magician whom you destroyed. He is now in your palace disguised as a holy woman whom he murdered. He it was who put that wish in your wife's head. Take care of yourself, for he means to kill you. So saying, the genie disappeared. Aladdin went back to the princess, saying his head ached, and requesting that the holy Fatima should be received to lay her hands on it. But when the magician came near, Aladdin, seizing his dagger, pierced him in the heart. What have you done? Cried the princess. You have killed the holy woman. Not so, said Aladdin, but a wicked magician, and told her how she had been deceived. After this, Aladdin and his wife lived in peace. He succeeded the Sultan when he died, and reigned for many years, leaving behind him a long line of kings. Yeah. I get drinking more of my tea. It's going to be really fun when I get to the Arabian Nights when I finish this book. Anyway. Let's see. Oh, an hour in. That's not too bad. Okay. The next story, from the period that they liked giving long stories and long titles of stories because it's just a story. The tale of a youth who was set out to learn what fear is. A father had two sons, of whom the eldest was clever and bright, and always knew what he was about. But the youngest was stupid, and couldn't learn or understand anything. So much so that those who saw him exclaimed, What a burden he'll be to his father! Now, when there was anything to be done, the eldest had always to do it. But if something was required later, or in the night time, and the way led through the courtyard or such ghostly place, he always replied, Oh no, father, nothing will induce me to go there. It makes me shudder. For he was afraid. Well, why not? Or when they sat in an evening around the fire telling stories which made one's flesh creep, the listeners sometimes said, Oh, it makes one shudder. The youngest sat in the corner, heard the exclamation, and could not understand what it meant. They're always saying it makes one shudder. It makes one shudder. Nothing makes me shudder. It's probably an art quite beyond me. Now it happened that his father said to him one day, Hearken you there in the corner. You are growing big and strong, and you must learn to earn your own bread. Look at your brother. What pains he takes. But all the money I've spent on your education is thrown away. My dear father, he replied, I will gladly learn. In fact, if it were possible, I should like to learn to shudder. I don't understand that bit yet. The oldest laughed when he heard this and thought to himself, Good heavens, what a ninny my brother is. It'll never come to any good. As bent as a twig. His tree is so inclined. The father sighed and answered him. You'll soon learn to shudder, but that won't help you make a living. Shortly after this, when the sexton came to pay them a visit, the father broke out to him and told him what a bad hand his youngest son was at everything. He knew nothing and learnt nothing. Only think, when I asked him how he proposed gaining a livelihood, he actually asked to be taught to shudder. If that's all he wants, said the sexton, I can teach him just that. Just you send him to me, I'll soon polish him up. The father was quite pleased at the proposal, because he thought it would be good discipline for the youth. And so the sexton took him into his house, and his duty was to toll the bell. After a few days he woke him at midnight, bade him rise and climb to the tower and toll. Now, my friend, I will teach you to shudder, he thought. He stole forth secretly in front, and when the youth was up above, and had turned around to grasp the bell rope, he saw, standing opposite the hole of the belfry, a white figure. Who's there? He called out, but the figure gave no answer, and neither stirred nor moved. Answer, cried the youth, or be gone. You have no business here at this hour of the night. But the sexton remained motionless, so that the youth might think it was a ghost. The youth called out a second time, What do you want here? Speak if you are an honest fellow, or I'll knock you down the stairs. The sexton thought, He can't mean that in earnest, so gave forth no sound, and stood as though he were made of stone. Then the youth shouted at him a third time, and as that too had no effect, he made a dash at the spectre and knocked it down the stairs, so that it fell about 10 steps and remained lying in a corner. Thereupon he tolled the bell and went to bed without saying a word and fell asleep. The sexton's wife waited a long time for her husband, but he never appeared. At last she became anxious and woke the youth and asked, Do you know where my husband went? He went up to the tower in front of you. No, answered the youth, but someone stood on the stairs up there just opposite of the trap door to the belfry. And because he wouldn't answer me or go away, I took him in for a rogue and knocked him down. You'd better go see if it was he. I should be such distress if it were. The wife ran and found her husband, who was lying groaning at the corner with his leg broken. She carried him down, then hurried with loud protestations to the youth's father. Your son has been the cause of petty misfortune, she cried. He threw my husband downstairs so that he broke a leg, and take a good-for-nothing wretch out of your house. The father was horrified, and hurried to the youth, and gave him a scolding. What unholy pranks are these? The evil one must have put them into your head. Father, he replied, only listen to me. I am quite guiltless. He stood there in the night like one who meant harm. I didn't know who he was, and warned him 3 times to be gone. Oh, groaned the father, you'll bring me nothing but misfortune. Get out of my sight. I won't have anything more to do with you. Yes, father, willingly. Only wait till daylight, then I'll set out and learn to shudder. And in that way I shall master the art which will gain me a living. Learn what you will, said the father. It's all one to me. Here are $50 for you, and set forth a wide world with them. But see and tell no one where you come from or who your father is, for I am ashamed of you. That sounds like my dad. Yes, father, whatever you wish, and if that's all you ask, I can easily keep it in mind. When day broke, the youth put the $50 in his pocket and set out on the high, hard road. He kept muttering to himself, If only I could shudder, if only I could shudder. Just at this moment, a man who came by heard the youth speaking to himself. And when they had gone on a bit, and were sight of the gallows, the man said to him, Look, there is a tree where 7 people are to be hanged, and are now learning to fly. Sit down under it, and wait till nightfall, and then you'll pretty soon learn to shudder. If that's all I have to do, answered the youth, it's easily done. But if I learn to shudder so quickly, then you shall have my $50. Just come back to me tomorrow morning early. Then the youth went to the gallows tree and sat down underneath it and waited for the evening. Because he felt cold, he lit himself a fire. But at midnight it got so chill that in spite of the fire he couldn't keep warm. And as the wind blew the corpses one against each other, tossing them to and fro, he thought to himself, if you are perishing down here by the fire, those poor wretches up there must be shaking and shivering. And because he had a tender heart, he put up a ladder, which he climbed and hooked the bodies one after another and took them down, all 7. Then he stirred the fire and blew it up, and placed them all around in a circle, that they might warm themselves. But they sat there and did not move, and caught fire against their clothes. Then he spoke, take care, or I'll hang you up again. But the dead men did not hear, and let their rags go on burning. Then he got angry and said, if you aren't careful yourselves, then I can't help you, and I don't mean to burn you with you. Then he hung them up again in a row. Then he sat back down by his fire and fell asleep. On the following morning, the man came to him and wished to get his $50, and said, now you know what it is to shudder? No, he answered. How should I? Those fellows up there never opened their mouths, and were so stupid that they let their old tatters they have on let their bodies burn. Then the old man saw he wouldn't get his $50 that day, and went off saying, well, I'm blessed to ever meet such a person in my life before. The youth went too on his way, and began to murmur to himself, oh, if only I could shudder! If I could only shudder! A carrier who was walking behind him heard those words, and asked him, who are you? I don't know, said the youth. Where do you hail from? I don't know. Who's your father? I mayn't say. What are you constantly muttering to yourself? Oh, said the youth, I would give words to shudder, but no one can teach me. Stuff and nonsense, said the carrier. Come along with me, and I'll soon put that right. The youth went with the carrier, and in the evening they reached an inn, where they were to spend the night. Then, just as they were entering the room, he said again, quite aloud, oh, if only I could shudder! If I could only shudder! The landlord, who heard this, laughed and said, if that's what you're sighing for, you shall be given every opportunity here. Oh, hold your tongue, said the landlord's wife. So many people have paid for their curiosity with their lives. If it were 1,000 pities of those beautiful eyes were never again to behold daylight. But the youth said, no matter how difficult, I insist on learning it. Why, that's what I've set out to do. He left the landlord no peace till he told him that in the neighborhood stood a haunted castle, where one could easily learn to shudder, if one only kept watch on it for 3 nights. The king had promised the man who dared to do this thing his daughter for a wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden under the sun. Aren't they all? There was also much treasure hidden in the castle, guarded by evil spirits, which would then be free, and was sufficient to make a poor man more than rich. Many had already gone in, but so far none had ever come out. So the youth went to the king and spoke. If I were allowed, I should much like to watch for 3 nights in the castle. The king looked at him, and because he pleased him, he said, you can ask for 3 nights, none of them living, and those you may take with you into the castle. Then he answered, well, I shall beg for a fire, a turning lathe, and a carving bench with a knife attached. On the following day the king had everything put into the castle, and when night drew, the youth took up his position there. He lit a bright fire in one of the rooms, placed the carving bench with a knife close to it, and set himself down on the turning lathe. Oh, if I could only shudder, he said. But I shan't learn it here either. Toward midnight, he wanted to make up the fire, and as he was blowing up a blaze, he heard a shriek from the corner. "Oh, Mia, how cold we are!" "You fools," he cried. "Why do you scream? If you are cold, come and sit by the fire and warm yourselves." And as he spoke, 2 huge black cats sprang fiercely forward and sat down, one on each side of him, and gazed wildly at him with their fiery eyes. After a time, when they had warmed themselves, they said, "Friend, shall we play a little game of cards?" "Why not?" he replied. "But let me see your paws." Then they outstretched their claws. "Ha!" he said. "What long nails you've got! Wait a minute, I must cut them first." Thereupon he seized them by the scruff of their necks, lifted them up on the carving bench, and screwed down their paws firmly. "After watching you narrowly," he said, "I no longer feel the desire to play cards with you." And with the words he struck them dead and threw them out into the water. Poor kitties. But when he had thus sent the 2 of them to their final rest, and was again about to sit down at the fire, out of every nook and corner came forth black cats and black dogs, with fiery chains in such swarms that he couldn't possibly get away from them. They yelled at the most ghastly manner, jumped upon his fire, scattered it all, and tried to put it out. He looked on quietly for a time, but when it got beyond a joke, he seized his carving knife and called out, "Be off with you rabble-rout!" then led at them. Some of them fled away, the others he struck dead and threw them into the pond below. When he returned, he blew up the sparks of the fire once more and warmed himself. And as he sat thus, his eyes refused to keep open any longer, and the desire to sleep stole over him. Then he looked around him and beheld up in the corner a large bed. "The very thing," said he, and lay down on it. When he wished to close his eyes, the bed began to move by itself, and ran all around the castle. "Capital," he said, "only a little quicker." Then the bed sped on as if drawn by 6 horses, over thresholds and stairs, up this way and down that. All of a sudden, crash, crash! With a bound it turned over, upside down, and lay like a mountain on top of him. But he tossed the blankets and pillows in the air, and emerged from underneath, and said, "Now anyone who has a fancy for it may go for a drive." Lay down by his fire, and slept till daylight. In the morning the king came, and when he beheld him lying on the ground, he imagined the ghosts had been too much for him, and that he was dead. Then he said, "What a pity, and such a fine fellow he was." And the youth heard this, and got up, and said, "It's not come to that yet." Then the king was astonished, but very glad, and asked how it was he fared with him. "Oh, first rate," he replied. "And now I've survived the first night, I shall go through the other 2 also." The landlord, when he went to him, opened his eyes, and said, "Well, I never thought to see you alive. Have you learned what it is shuddering?" "No," he replied. "It's quite hopeless. If someone could only tell me how to." The second night he went up to the old castle. He sat down by the fire and began his old refrain, "If only I could shudder." As midnight approached, a noise and din broke out, at first gentle, but gradually increasing. Then all was quiet for a minute, and at length was a loud scream. Half a man dropped down the chimney and fell before him. "Hi up there!" shouted he. "There's another half wanted down here. There's not enough." And then the din commenced once more, and there was a shrieking and yelling, and then the other half fell down. "Wait a bit, I'll stir up the fire for you." When he had done this, and again looked around, the 2 pieces had united, and a horrible-looking man on his seat. "Come," said the youth, "I didn't bargain for that. The seat is mine." The man tried to shove him away, but the youth wouldn't allow it for a moment, and, pushing him off by force, sat down in his place again. Then more men dropped down, one after the other, who, fetching 9 skeleton legs and 2 skulls, put them up and played ninepins with them. The youth thought he would like to play the game too, and said, "Look here, do you mind my joining the game?" "No, not if you have money." "I've money enough," he said, "but your balls aren't very round." Then he took the skulls and placed them on the lathe, and he turned them until they were round. "Now they'll roll along better," he said, and "Whoopla! Now the fun begins." They played with them and lost some of his money, but when 12 struck, everything vanished before his eyes. He lay down and slept peacefully. The next morning the king came, anxious for news. "How have you got on this time?" he asked. "I played 9 pins," he answered, "and lost a few pence." "Did you shudder then?" "No such luck. I did make myself merry. Oh, if I only knew what it was to shudder." On the 3rd night he sat down again on his bench and said, in the most desponding way, "If only I could shudder!" When it got late, 6 big men came in carrying a coffin. Then he cried, "Ha ha! That's most likely my little cousin who only died a few nights ago." And, beckoning on his finger, he called out, "Come, my small cousin, come!" They placed the coffin on the ground, and he approached it and took off the cover. In it lay a dead man. A surprise. He felt his face, and it was cold as ice. "Wait," he said, "I'll heat you up a bit." He went to the fire and warmed his hand, and then laid it on the man's face. But the cold death remained. Then he lifted him out and set him down by the fire, and laid him on his knee, and rubbed his arms so that the cold blood might circulate again. When that too had no effect, it occurred to him that if 2 people lay together in bed, they warmed each other. So he put him into the bed and covered him up, then lay down beside him. After a while the corpse became warm, and began to move. Then the youth said, "Now, my little cousin, what would have happened if I hadn't warmed you?" But the dead man rose up and cried out, "Now I will strangle you." "What?" he said. "Is that the thanks I get? You should put the coffin back. I should put you straight back in the coffin." They lifted him up and threw him in, and closed the lid. Then the 6 men came and carried him out again. "I simply can't shudder," he said, "and it's clear I shan't learn it in a lifetime here." Then a man entered, of more than ordinary size, and of a very fearful appearance. But he was old and had a white beard. "Oh, you miserable creature! Now you will know what it is to shudder," he cried, "for you must die." "Not so quickly," answered the youth. "If I am to die, you must catch me first." "I shall soon lay hold of you," spoke the monster. "Gently, gently. Don't boast too much. I'm as strong as you, and stronger too." "We'll soon see," said the old man. "If you're stronger than I'll let you off. Come, let's have a try." Then he led him through the dark passages to a forge, and grasping an axe, he drove one of the anvils into a blow into the earth. "I can do better than that," cried the youth, and went to the other anvil. The old man drew near him in order to watch closely, and his white beard hung right down. The youth seized the axe, and cleft the anvil open, and jammed in the old man's beard. "Now I have you," he said. "Now it's your turn to die." Then he seized an iron rod, and belabored the man until he, whimpering, begged him to leave off, and he would give him great riches. The youth drew out the axe and let him go. The old man led him down the castle and showed him a cellar with 3 chests of gold. "One of these," said he, "belongs to a poor, one to the king, the other is yours." At that moment 12 struck, and the spirit vanished, leaving the youth alone in the dark. "I'll surely be able to find the way out," he said, and groped about. He at length found his way back to the room, and he slept by the fire. The next morning the king came and said, "Well, now you've surely learned to shudder." "No," he answered. "What can it be? My dead cousin was here, and an old bearded man came. He showed me heaps of money down below there, but what shuddering is no one has told me. Then the king spoke. You have freed the castle from its curse, and you shall marry my daughter. Well, that's all charming, he said, but I still don't know what it is to shudder. Then the gold was brought up, and the wedding was celebrated. But the young king, though he loved his wife dearly, and thought he was very happy, still kept on saying, If I could only shudder, if I could only shudder. At last he reduced her to despair. Then her maid said, I'll help you. We'll soon make him shudder. So she went out to the stream that flowed through the garden, and a pailful of little gudgeons brought to her. At night, when the king was asleep, his wife had pulled the clothes off him, pour the pail full of fresh gudgeons over him, so that the little fish swam all about him. When he awoke, he cried out, Oh, how I shudder, how I shudder! Dear wife, I know what shuddering is. Okay. His wife is clever. I wouldn't have thought about dumping a bunch of fish on someone to make them shiver. But I guess it would work. Okay. Got half an hour. We're keeping going. Alright. Our next story is A Tale as Old as Time. Okay. I can do that. It's Beauty and the Beast. Okay. Once upon a time, in a very far-off country, there lived a merchant who had been so fortunate in all his undertakings that he was enormously rich. As he had, however, 6 sons and 6 daughters, he found that his money was not too much to let them have everything they fancied, as they were accustomed to do. Spoiled rich kids. But one day a most unexpected misfortune befell them. Their house caught fire and was speedily burnt to the ground, with all the splendid furniture, the books, pictures, gold, silver, and precious goods it contained, and it was only the beginning of their troubles. And the books. Their father, who had until this moment prospered in all ways, suddenly lost every ship he had upon the sea, either to a dint of pirates, shipwreck, or fire. Then he heard that his clerks in the distant countries, whom he trusted entirely, had proved unfaithful, and at last from great wealth he fell into direst poverty. All that he had left was a little house in a desolate place, at least 100 leagues from the town in which he had lived, and to this he was forced to retreat with his children, who were in despair at the idea of leading such a different life. Indeed, the daughters at first hoped that their friends, who had been so numerous while they were rich, would insist on their staying in their houses now that they no longer possessed one. No such luck. But they soon found that they were left alone, and that their former friends even attributed their misfortunes to their own extravagance, and showed no intention of offering them any help. So nothing was left for them but to make their departure to the cottage, which stood in the midst of the dark forest, and seemed to be the most dismal place on the face of the earth. Nothing wrong with a forest. What are we talking about? As they were too poor to have any servants, the girls had to work hard, like peasants, and the sons, for their part, cultivated the fields to earn their living. Roughly clothed and living in the simplest ways, the girls regretted unceasingly the luxuries and amusements of their former life. Only the youngest tried to be brave and cheerful. She had been as sad as anyone when misfortune overtook her father, but soon recovering her natural gaiety, she set to work to make the best of things and amuse her father and brothers as well as she could, and to try to persuade her sisters to join her in dancing and singing. But they would do nothing of the sort, and because she was not as doleful as themselves, they declared that this miserable life was all she was fit for. But she was really far prettier and cleverer than they were. Indeed, she was so lovely that she was always called Beauty. After 2 years, when they were all beginning to get used to their new life, something happened to disturb their tranquility. Their father received news that one of his ships, which had been believed to have been lost, had come safely into port with a rich cargo. All of the sons and daughters at once thought that their poverty was at an end, and wanted to set out directly for the town. But their father was more prudent, begged them to wait a little while, and though it was harvest time, he could still be spared. Determined to go himself first to make inquiries. Only the youngest daughter had any doubt but that they would soon be rich as they were before, or at least rich enough to live comfortably in some town where they could find amusement and gay companions once more. So they all loaded their father with commissions for dresses and jewels which they would have taken a fortune to buy. Only Beauty, feeling sure that it was of no use, did not ask for anything. Her father, noticing her silence, said, "And what shall I bring you, Beauty?" "The only thing I wish is for you to see you come home safely," she answered. But this only vexed her sisters, who fancied she was blaming them for having such costly things. Her father, however, was pleased, but as he thought that at her age she certainly ought to like pretty presents, he told her to choose something. "Well, dear father," she said, "as you insist upon it, I beg that you will bring me a rose. I've not seen one since we came here, and I love them so much." So the merchant set out and reached the town as quickly as possible, but only to find that his former companions, believing him to be dead, had already divided between them the goods which the ship had brought, and after 6 months of trouble and expense he found himself as poor as when he'd started, having been able to recover just enough to pay for the costs of his journey. To make matters worse, he was obliged to leave the town in the most terrible weather, so that by the time he was within a few leagues of his home, he was almost exhausted with cold and fatigue. Though he knew it would take some hours to get through the forest, he was so anxious to be at his journey's end that he resolved to go on. But night overtook him, and the deep snow and bitter frost made it impossible for his horse to carry him any further. Ouch. Not a house was to be seen. The only shelter he could get was the hollow trunk of a great tree. And there he crouched all night, which seemed to him the longest he had ever known. In spite of his weariness, the howling of the wolves kept him awake, and even when at last the day broke, he was not much better off, for the falling snow had covered every path, and he did not know which way to turn. At length he made out some sort of track, and though the beginning of the journey was rough and slippery, that he fell down more than once, it presently became easier, and led him to an avenue of trees, which ended in a splendid castle. It seems to the merchant very strange that no snow had fallen on the avenue, which was entirely composed of orange trees, covered with flowers and fruit. When he reached the first court of the castle, he saw before him a flight of agate steps, and went up them and passed through several splendid furnished rooms. The pleasant warmth of the air revived him, and he felt very hungry, but there seemed to be nobody in this vast and splendid palace whom he could ask to give him something to eat. Deep silence reigned everywhere, and at last, tired of roaming through empty rooms and galleries, he stopped in a smaller room to take a rest, where a clear fire was burning and a couch was drawn up closely to it. Thinking that this must have been prepared for someone who was expected, he sat down to wait until he should come, and very soon fell into a sweet sleep. When his extreme hunger wakened him after several hours, he was still alone, but a little table upon which was a good dinner had been drawn up close to him, and as he had eaten nothing for 24 hours, he lost no time in beginning his meal, hoping that he might soon have an opportunity of thanking this considerate entertainer, whoever it might be. But no one appeared, and even after another long sleep, from which he woke completely refreshed, there was no sign of anybody, though a fresh meal of dainty cakes and fruit was prepared upon the little table at his elbow. Being naturally timid, the silence began to terrify him, and he resolved to search once more through all the rooms, but it was of no use. Not even a servant was to be seen. There was no sign of life in the palace. He began to wonder what he should do, and to amuse himself by pretending that all the treasures he saw were his own, and considering how he would divide them amongst his children. Then he went down into the garden, and though it was winter everywhere else, here the sun shone, and the birds sang, and the flowers bloomed, and the air was soft and sweet. The merchant, in ecstasies with all he saw and heard, said to himself, "This must be meant for me. I will go this minute and bring my children to share all these delights." In spite of being so cold and weary when he reached the castle, he had taken his horse to the stable and fed it. Now he thought he would saddle it and for his homeward journey, and he turned down the path which led to the stable. This path had a hedge of roses on each side of it, and the merchant thought he had never seen or smelt such exquisite flowers. They reminded him of his promise to Beauty, and he stopped and had just gathered one to take to her when he was startled by a strange noise behind him. Turning round, he saw a frightful beast, which seemed to be very angry, and said with a terrible voice,
"Who told you you could gather my roses?"
"Was it not enough that I allowed you to be in my palace? Was it kind to you? Is this the way you show your gratitude, by stealing my flowers? But your insolence shall not go unpunished." The merchant, terrified by these furious words, dropped the fatal rose, and throwing himself on his knees, "Pardon me, noble sir, I am terribly grateful for you and your hospitality, which was so magnificent that I could not imagine that you would be offended by my taking such a thing as a rose." But the beast's anger was not lessened by the speech. "You are very ready with excuses and flattery," he cried, "but that will not save you from death you deserve." "Alas," thought the merchant, "if my daughter were only to know what danger her rose has brought into me." And in despair he began to tell the beast all his misfortunes, and the reason of his journey, not forgetting to mention Beauty's reason. "The king's ransom would hardly have procured all that my daughters asked," he said, "but I thought that I might at least sacred beauty her rose. I beg you to forgive me, for you see I meant no harm. The beast considered for a moment. Then he said in a less furious tone, I will forgive you on one condition. That is, you will give me one of your daughters. Ah, cried the merchant. If I were cruel enough to buy my own life at the expense of one of my children's, what excuse could I invent to bring her here? No excuse would be necessary, answered the beast. If she comes at all, she must come willingly. On no other condition will I have her. See if one of them is courageous enough and loves you well enough to come and save your life. You seem to be an honest man, so I will trust you to go home. I give you a month to see if either of your daughters will come back with you, and stay here to let you go free. If neither of them is willing, you must come alone, after bidding them goodbye, forever. Then you will belong to me. And do not imagine that you can hide from me, for if you fail to keep your word, I will come and fetch you, added the beast grimly. Damn. The merchant accepted this proposal, though he did not really think any of his daughters could be persuaded to come. He had promised to return at the time appointed, and then, anxious to escape from the presence of the beast, he asked permission to set off at once. But the beast answered that he could not go until the next day. Then you will find a horse ready for you, he said. Now go and eat your supper, and await my orders. The poor merchant, more dead than alive, went back to his room, where the most delicious supper was already served on the little table which was drawn up by the blazing fire. But he was too terrified to eat, and only tasted a few of the dishes, for fear the beast should be angry if he did not obey his orders. When he had finished, he heard a great noise in the next room, which he knew meant the beast was coming. As he could do nothing to escape the visit, the only thing that remained was to seem as little afraid as possible. So when the beast appeared and asked roughly if he would sup well, the merchant answered humbly that he had, thanks to his host's kindness. Then the beast warned him to remember their agreement, and to prepare his daughter exactly for what she had to expect. Do not get up tomorrow, he added, until you see the sun and hear the golden bell ring. Then you will find your breakfast waiting for you here, and the horse you are to ride will be ready in the courtyard. He will also bring you back again when you come with your daughter a month hence. Farewell. Take a rose to beauty, and remember your promise. The merchant was only too glad when the beast went away, and though he could not sleep for sadness, lay down until the sun rose. Then, after a hasty breakfast, he went to gather Beauty's rose, and mounted his horse, which carried him off so swiftly that in an instant he had lost sight of the palace, and he was still wrapped in the gloomy thoughts when he stopped before the door of the cottage. His sons and daughters, who had been very uneasy at his long absence, rushed to meet him, eager to know the result of his journey, which, seeing him mounted on a splendid horse, and wrapped in a rich mantle, they supposed it to be favorable. He hid the truth from them at first, only saying sadly that Beauty has to give her the rose. Here is what you asked me to bring you. You little know what it cost. But this excited their curiosity so greatly that presently he told them his adventures from beginning to end, and then they were all very unhappy. The girls lamented loudly over their lost hopes, and the sons declared that their father should not return to this terrible castle, and began to make plans for killing the beast if it should come to fetch him. But he reminded them that he had promised to go back. Then the girls were very angry with Beauty, and said it was all her fault, and that she had asked for something sensible, this would have never happened, and complained bitterly that they should have to suffer for her folly. Poor Beauty, much distressed, said to him, "I have indeed caused this misfortune, but I assure you I did it innocently. Who would have guessed that to ask for a rose in the middle of summer would cause such misery? But as I did the mischief, it is only that I should suffer for it. I will therefore go back with my father to keep his promise." Summer and snowing. Okay. At first, nobody would hear of this arrangement, and her father and her brothers, who loved her dearly, declared that nothing should make them let her go. But Beauty was firm. At this time drew near, she divided all of her possessions between her sisters, and said goodbye to everything she loved. And when the fatal day came, she encouraged and cheered her father as they mounted together the horse which had brought him back. It seemed to fly rather than gallop, but so smoothly that Beauty was not frightened. Indeed, she would have rather enjoyed the journey if she had not feared what might happen to her at the end of it. Her father still tried to persuade her to go back, but in vain. Talking the night fell, and then, to their great surprise, wonderful, splendid colors began to shine in all directions. The splendid fireworks blazed out before them. All the forest was illuminated by them, and they felt pleasantly warm, though it had been bitterly cold before. This lasted until they reached the avenue of orange trees, where the statues were holding flaming torches, and as they got nearer to the palace, they saw that it was illuminated from the roof to the ground, and music sounded from the courtyard. Okay, sorry. "Beast must be very hungry," Beauty said, trying to laugh, "if he makes all this rejoicing of the arrival of prey." That's funny. But in spite of her anxiety, she could not help admiring all the wonderful things she saw. The horse stopped at the foot of the flight of steps leading to the terrace, and when they had dismounted, her father led her to the little room where he had been before, where they found a splendid fire burning, and a table daintily spread with a delicious supper. The merchant knew that this was meant for them, and Beauty, who was rather less frightened now that she had passed through the many rooms and seen nothing of the beast, was quite willing to begin, for her long ride had made her very hungry. But they had hardly finished their meal when the noise of the beast's footsteps was heard approaching, and Beauty clung to her father in terror, which became all greater when she saw how frightened he was. But when the beast really appeared, though she trembled at the sight of him, she made a great effort to hide her terror, and saluted him respectfully. This evidently pleased the beast. After looking at her, he said in a tone that might have struck terror in the boldest heart, though he did not seem to be angry. "Good evening, old man. Good evening, Beauty." The merchant was too terrified to reply, but Beauty answered, sweetly, "Good evening, beast." "Have you come willingly?" asked the beast. "Will you be content to stay here when your father goes away?" Beauty answered bravely that she was quite prepared to stay. "I am pleased with you," said the beast. "As you have come on your own accord, you may stay. As for you, old man," he added, turning to the merchant, "at sunrise tomorrow you will take your departure. When the bell rings, get up early and eat your breakfast, and you will find the same horse waiting to take you home. But remember that you must never expect to see my palace again." Damn. Then, turning to Beauty, he said, Take your father into the next room and help him choose everything you think your brothers and sisters would like to have. You will find 2 traveling trunks there. Fill them as full as you can. It is only that you should send them something very precious to remember yourself by. Then he went away after saying, "Goodbye, Beauty. Goodbye, old man." And though Beauty was beginning to think the great dismay of her father's departure, she was afraid to disobey the beast's orders. And they went into the next room, which had shelves and cupboards all around it. And they were greatly surprised at the riches it contained. There were splendid dresses fit for a queen, with all the ornaments that were to be worn with them. And when Beauty opened the cupboards, she was quite dazzled to see gorgeous jewels that lay in heaps on every shelf. After choosing a vast quantity, of which she divided among her sisters, for she made a heap of wonderful dresses for each of them, she opened the last chest, which was full of gold. "I think, father," she said, "that as the gold will be more useful to you, we had better take out the other things again, and fill the trunks with it." So they did this, but the more they put the more room there seemed to be, and at last they put back all the jewels and dresses that they had taken out, and Beauty even added as many more jewels as she could carry at once. And then the trunks were not too full, but they were so heavy that an elephant could not carry them. "The beast was mocking us," cried the merchant. "He must have pretended to give us all these things, knowing that I could never carry them." "Let us wait and see," answered Beauty. "I cannot believe he meant to deceive us. All we can do is to fasten them up and leave them ready." So they did this, and returned to the little room, where, to their astonishment, they found breakfast ready. The merchant ate his with great appetite, and the beast's generosity made him believe that he might perhaps venture to come back soon to see Beauty. But she felt sure that her father was leaving her forever, so she was very sad when the bell rang sharply for a second time, and warned them that the time had come for them to part. They went down to the courtyard, where 2 horses were waiting, one loaded with the 2 trunks, and the other for him to ride. They were pawing at the ground in an impatience to start, and the merchant was forced to bid Beauty a hasty farewell, and as soon as he was mounted, he went off at such a pace that she lost sight of him in an instant. Then Beauty began to cry and wandered sadly back to her room. But she soon found that she was very sleepy, and she had nothing better to do than she lay down, and instantly fell asleep. And then she dreamed that she was walking by a brook bordered by trees, and lamenting her sad fate, when a young prince, handsomer than anyone she had ever seen, and with a voice that went straight to her heart, came and said to her, "Ah, Beauty, you are not so unfortunate as you suppose. Here you will be rewarded for all you have suffered elsewhere. Your every wish will be satisfied. Only try to find me out, no matter how I may be disguised, as I love you dearly, and in making me happy you will find your own happiness. Be as true-hearted as you are beautiful, and we shall have nothing left to wish for." "What can I do, Prince, to make you happy?" said Beauty. "Only be grateful," he answered, "and do not trust too much to your eyes. And above all, do not desert me until you have saved me from my cruel misery." After this, she thought she found herself in a room with a stately and beautiful lady, who said to her, "Dear Beauty, try not to regret all you have left behind you, for you are destined to a better fate. Only do not let yourself be deceived by appearances." Beauty found her dreams so interesting that she was in no hurry to awake, but presently the clock roused her by calling her name softly 12 times, and then she got up and found her dressing table set out with everything she could possibly want. And when her toilet was finished, she found dinner was waiting in the room next to hers. But dinner does not take very long when you are all by yourself, and very soon she sat down cozily in the corner of the sofa. and began to think about the charming prince she had seen in her dreams. He said I could make him happy, Beauty said to herself. It seems, then, that this horrible beast keeps him a prisoner. How can I set him free? I wonder why they both told me not to trust to appearances. I don't understand. But after all, it was only a dream. So why should I trouble myself about it? I'd better go and find something to do to amuse myself. She got up and began to explore many of the rooms of the palace. The first she entered was lined with mirrors, and Beauty saw herself reflected on every side, and thought she had never seen such a charming room. Then a bracelet, which was hanging from a chandelier, caught her eye, and on taking it down she was greatly surprised to find that it held the portrait of her unknown admirer, just as she had seen him in her dream. With great delight she slipped the bracelet on her arm, and went into a gallery of pictures, where she soon found a portrait of the same handsome prince, as large as life, and so well painted that she studied it. He seemed to smile kindly at her. Tearing herself away from the portrait at last, she passed into a room which contained every musical instrument under the sun, and here she amused herself for a long while trying some of them, and singing until she was tired. The next room was a library, and she saw everything she had ever wanted to read, as well as everything she had read, and it seemed to her that the whole lifetime would not be enough to read the names of the books, there were so many. By this time it was growing dusk, and the wax candles and the diamond and ruby candlesticks were beginning to light themselves in every room. Beauty found her supper served just at the time she preferred to have it, but she did not see anyone or hear a sound, and though her father had warned her that she would be alone, she began to find it rather dull. But presently she heard Beast coming, and wondered tremblingly if he meant to eat her up now. However, he did not seem all ferocious, and only said gruffly, "Good morning, Beauty. Good evening, Beauty." Sorry. She answered cheerfully, and managed to conceal her terror. When the beast asked her how she had been amusing herself, and she told him all the rooms she had seen. Then he asked her if she thought she could be happy in this place. And Beauty answered that everything was so beautiful that she would be very hard to please if she could not be happy. And after about an hour's talk, Beauty began to think that the beast was not nearly so terrible as she had supposed at first. Then he got up to leave her, and said in his gruff voice, "Do you love me, Beauty? Will you marry me?" "Oh, what do I say?" cried Beauty, for she was afraid to make the beast angry by refusing. "Say yes or no, without fear," he replied. "Oh, no, beast," said Beauty hastily. "Since you will not, good night, Beauty," he said, and she answered, "Good night, beast." Very glad to find that her refusal had not provoked him, and after he was gone she was very soon in bed asleep, and dreaming of her unknown prince. She thought he came to her and said, "Ah, Beauty, why are you so unkind to me? I fear I am fated to be unhappy for many a long day still." And then her dreams changed, but the charming prince figured in all of them. And in the morning came her first thoughts was to look at the portrait and see if it was really like him, and she found that it certainly was. This morning she decided to amuse herself in the garden, for the sun shone and all the fountains were playing, but she was astonished to find that every place was familiar to her. Presently she came to a brook where the myrtle trees were growing where she had first met the prince in her dream, and that made her think more than ever that he must be kept a prisoner by the beast. When she was tired she went back to the palace and found a new room full of materials of every kind of work, ribbons to make into bows and silks to work into flowers. Then there was an aviary full of rare birds, which were so tame that they flew to Beauty as soon as they saw her and perched upon her shoulders and head. Pretty little creatures, she said. How I wish that your cage was nearer to my room, and that I might hear you often sing. So, saying, she opened a door and found to her delight that it led to her own room, though she had thought it was quite on the other side of the palace. There were more birds in the room farther on, parrots and cockadoos that could talk, and they greeted Beauty by name. Indeed, she found them so entertaining that she took one or two back to her room, and they talked to her while she was at supper, after which Beast paid her his usual visit, and asked her the same question as before, then a gruff, "Good night," and he took his departure. And Beauty went to bed to dream of her beautiful, mysterious prince. The days passed swiftly in different amusements, and after a while Beauty found out another strange thing in the palace, which often pleased her when she tired of being alone. There was one room which she had not noticed particularly. It was empty, except for under each of the windows stood a very comfortable chair. And the first time she looked out of the window, it seemed to her that the black curtain prevented her from seeing anything outside. But the second time she went into the room, happened to be tired, she sat down in one of the chairs, when instantly the curtain was rolled aside, and a most amusing pantomime was acted out before her. There were dances, and colored lights, and music, and pretty dresses. It was all so gay that Beauty was in ecstasies. After that she tried the other 7 windows in turn, and there were some new and surprising entertainments to be seen from each of them, so that Beauty never felt lonely any more. Every evening supper after the Beast came to see her, and always before saying good night asked her the same terrible voice, "Beauty, will you marry me?" And it seemed to Beauty, now she understood him better, that when she said, "No, Beast," he went away quite sad. But her happy dreams of the handsome prince soon made her forget the poor Beast, and the only thing that was disturbing her was to be consistently told to distrust appearances, and to let her heart guide her, not her eyes. Many other equally perplexing things, which, consider as she would, she could not understand. So everything went on for a long time, until at last, happy as she was, Beauty began to long for the sight of her father and her brothers and sisters, and one night, seeing her look very sad, the Beast asked her what was the matter. Beauty had quite ceased to be afraid of him. Now she knew that he was really gentle in spite of his ferocious looks and his dreaded voices. So she answered that she was longing to see her home once more. Upon hearing this, the Beast seemed sadly distressed and cried miserably, "Ah, Beauty, have you the heart to desert an unhappy beast like this? What more do you want to make you happy? Is it because you hate me that you want to escape?" "No, dear Beast," answered Beauty softly. "I do not hate you, and I should be very sorry never to see you any more. But I long to see my father again. Only let me go for 2 months, and I shall promise to come back to you and stay for the rest of my life." The Beast, who had been sighing dolefully while she spoke, now replied, "I cannot refuse you anything you ask, even though it should cost me my life. Take the 4 boxes you will find in the room next to your own, and fill them with everything you wish to take with you. But remember your promise, and come back when your 2 months are over, or you shall have cause to repent it. For if you do not come back in good time, you will find your faithful Beast dead. You will not need any chariot to bring you back. Only say goodbye to your brothers and sisters the night before you come away. And when you have gone to bed, turn this ring around your finger and say firmly, 'I wish to go back to my palace and see my Beast again.' Good night, Beauty. Fear nothing. Sleep peacefully. before long, you shall see your father once more. My voice is going to be so shot after this. As soon as Beauty was alone, she hastened to fill the boxes with all the rare and precious things that she saw about her, and only when she was tired of heaping things into them did they seem to be full. Then she went to bed, but could hardly sleep for joy. And when at last she began to dream of her beloved prince, she was grieved to see him stretched upon a grassy bank, sad and weary, and hardly like himself. "What is the matter?" she cried. He looked at her reproachfully and said, "How can you ask me, cruel one? Are you not leaving me to my death, perhaps?" "Ah, don't be so sorrowful," cried Beauty. "I am only going to assure my father that I am safe and happy. I have promised the beast faithfully that I will come back. He would die of grief if I did not keep my word." "What would the matter to you?" said the prince. "Surely you would not care." "Indeed, I should be ungrateful if I did not care for such a kind beast," cried Beauty indignantly. "I would die to save him from pain. I assure you that it is not his fault that he is so ugly." Then a strange sound woke her. Someone was speaking not very far away, and opening her eyes she found herself in a room she had never seen before, which was certainly not nearly so splendid as those she was used to in Beast's palace. Where could she be? She got up and dressed hastily, and then saw that the boxes she had packed the night before were all in the room. While she was wondering what magic the beast had transported them and herself into the strange place, she suddenly heard her father's voice, and rushed out and greeted him joyfully. Her brothers and sisters were all astonished at her appearance, as they had never expected to see her again, and there was no end to the questions they asked her. She had also much to hear about what happened to them while she was away, and her father's journey home. But when they heard that she only came to be with him for a short time, and then must go back to the beast's palace forever, they lamented loudly. Then Beauty asked her father what he thought could be the meaning of her strange dreams, and why the prince consistently begged her not to trust to appearances. After much consideration, he answered, "You tell me that the beast, as frightful as he is, loves you dearly, and deserves your love and gratitude for his gentleness and kindness. I think the prince must mean you to understand that you ought to reward him by doing his wishes to you, in spite of his ugliness." Beauty could not help seeing that this seemed very probable. Still, when she thought of her dear prince who was so handsome, she did not feel at all inclined to marry the beast. At any rate, for 2 months she need not decide, but could enjoy herself with her sisters. But though they were rich now, lived in a town again, and had plenty of acquaintances, Beauty found that nothing amused her very much, and she often thought of the palace where she was so happy, especially as at home she never once dreamed of her dear prince, and she felt quite sad without him. Then her sisters seemed to have got quite used to being without her, and even found her rather in the way, so she would not have been sorry when the 2 months were over but for her father and brothers, who begged her to stay, and seemed so grieved at the thought of her departure that she had not the courage to say good-bye to them. Every day when she got up she meant to say it at night, and when night came she put it off again, until at last she had a dismal dream which helped her make up her mind. She thought she had wandered in a lonely path in the palace gardens, when she heard groans which seemed to come from some bushes hiding an entrance to a cave. And running quickly to see what could be the matter, she found the beast stretched out on his side, apparently dying. He reproached her faintly with being the cause of his distress. At the same moment a stately lady appeared and said gravely, "Ah, Beauty, you are only just in time to save his life. See what happens when people do not keep their promises. If you had delayed one day more, you would have found him dead." Beauty was so terrified by this dream that the next morning she announced her intention of going back at once. That very night she said good-bye to her father and all her brothers and sisters, and as soon as she was in bed, she turned a ring around her finger and said firmly, I wish to go back to my palace and see my beast again, as she had been told to do so. Then she fell asleep instantly, and woke only to hear the clock saying, Beauty, Beauty, 12 times in its musical voice, which told her at once that she was really in the palace once more. Everything was just as before. Her birds were glad to see her, and Beauty thought she had never known such a long day, for she was so anxious to see the beast again that she felt as if supper time would never come. But when it did come, and no beast appeared, she was really frightened. So after listening and waiting for a long time, she ran down to the garden and searched for him. Up and down the paths and avenues ran poor Beauty, calling him in vain, for no one answered, and not a trace of him she could find, until at last, quite tired, she stopped for a moment's rest, and that she saw, standing opposite the shady path she had seen in her dream. She rushed down it, and sure enough, there was the cave, and in it lay the beast, asleep, as Beauty thought. Quite glad to have found him, she ran up and stroked his head, but, to her horror, he did not move or open his eyes. Oh, he's dead, and it's my fault, said Beauty, crying bitterly. But then, looking at him again, she fancied he still breathed, and hastily fetching some water from the nearest fountain, she sprinkled it over his face, and to her great delight he began to revive. Oh, beast, how you frightened me, she cried. I never knew how much I loved you until just now, when I feared it was too late to save your life. Can you really love such an ugly creature as I am? Said the beast faintly. Ah, Beauty, you only came just in time. I was dying because I thought you had forgotten your promise. But go back now and rest. I shall see you again by and by. Beauty, who was half expected that he would be angry with her, was reassured by his gentle voice, and went back to the palace, where supper was awaiting her. And afterward the beast came in as usual, and talked about the time she had spent with her father, and asking if she had enjoyed herself, and if they had been very glad to see her. Beauty answered politely, and quite enjoyed telling him all that had happened to her. And when at last the time came for her to go, and he asked, as he had so often before, Beauty, will you marry me? She answered softly, Yes, dear beast. As she spoke, a blaze of light sprang up before the windows of the palace. Fireworks crackled and guns banged, and across the avenue of orange trees, the letters, all made of fireflies, was written, Long live the prince and his bride! Turning to ask the beast what it all could mean, Beauty found that he had disappeared, and in his place stood her long-loved prince. At the same moment the wheels of the chariot were heard upon the terrace, and two ladies entered the room. One of them Beauty recognized as the stately lady she had seen in her dreams. The other was so grand and queenly that Beauty hardly knew which to greet first. But the one she already knew said to her companion, Well, Queen, this is Beauty, who had the courage to rescue your son from the terrible enchantment. They love one another, and only your consent to their marriage is wanting to make them perfectly happy. I consent with all my heart, cried the Queen. How can I ever thank you enough, charming girl, for having restored my dear son to his natural form? And then she then she tenderly embraced Beauty and the prince, who had meanwhile been greeted the fairy and receiving her congratulations. Now, said the fairy to the beast, I suppose you would like me to send you all of your brothers and sisters to dance at your wedding? And so she did. And the wedding was celebrated that very day with the utmost splendor. And Beauty and the Beast lived happily ever after. Oh, damn, that killed my throat. Whew, survived that one. Yeah, those were longer stories than expected, but we made it over the 2 hour mark, so I guess we did pretty good. Okay, now let's see who's on Weekend Raid. If anyone has any suggestions, feel free to shout them out. Because I'm fairly sure I do have shoutouts enabled. If not, oops, I don't know. But let's see. Who's on? Who's on? I have to look around my camera to see my screen. Oh, man. Let's see. Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme. Why am I singing? I don't really know, but it seems apropos. Okay, enough of that silliness. Okay, who's on? Who's on? Who's on? Who's on? Any shout? Any raid requests? Anyone? Anyone? Fry. Fry. I don't see anyone else doing just chatting or reading or anything like that. Well, it's Cane Knight. Look at that quick. Damn. Those are. Most of those were familiar. I think there was only one that I had read before. Oh, camera's falling. Oh. Let's see, which one hadn't I read before? Let's see. The only one I didn't know previously was. Where is it? Oh. Tale of the Youth Who. Oh, no. I've read all these before. Cool. Just another name of the boy who learned to fear. That was like Cinderella, Aladdin, Tale of the Youth Who was set. That's learn what fear was. I think it has an actual name somewhere, but then the Beauty and the Beast. Da, 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 da. Okay. So no raid requests, huh? Who all is on? Who all is on? Who all is on? Who's on? Why am I not seeing everyone I know? It's what 11:23 Central. Freaking brainworms come, whispering in my ear, making me hum. Beauty and the Beast. I should really stop doing that. Okay, let's just read Dusk. She's on. Always fun to harass her. So, ouch. Raid Dusk. Duskwalker with the symbol at the end because everyone forgets the underscore for some odd reason. Damn, coughing again. So, thank you everyone for coming in and hanging out, listening to me ramble aimlessly, telling stories. So, yeah, we're gonna go read dusk, and I hope you all have a good evening. And good night, Cubs. Sweet dreams. Tale as old as time, song as old as time. Okay, I'm stopping singing. Night, everyone.